Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Third Spaces panel discussion today called Traversing the Binaries, Unstable States, and Dual Truths, with an awesome collection of both artists, curators, and designers. And yeah, I just wanted to first begin by thinking about why we decided to create this exhibition and putting in some context as to why we have this collection of awesome panelists today. So if the slides could be moved, please. Thank you. So here you can see that this third space, what we're trying to do is this digital arts computing exhibition is this huge group show that tries to bring so many different kinds of practices across all 3 year groups. So a lot of the conversation we're trying to bring together these constellation of works is how can we both represent that there's a multitude of visions and attempts that we're trying to create of making sense of the world, but we're not only looking inwards at our art being personal, but we're also looking at it critically, how it's being distributed into the world, because our practices are so entangled between art and technology. And this space that you see being filled by all the possibilities it's not just an invitation to be filled. It can also be kept blank, but it's also not an open-ended vision into the future. What we're trying to do with this exhibition is we're trying to offer up almost a speculative archive that operates as a parallel world of unstable states and dual truths. And we're trying to disrupt these binaries of knowable and the unimaginable, structure and agency, as well as everyday life and unending history. So I hope you guys definitely check out the online exhibition, which has an awesome collection of works across all 3 years of digital arts computing. And I guess before we get started, I think it's important for me to introduce myself. I'm Yasmin Morgan, and my piece in this exhibition is called Amorphous Butterfly. And what this online piece is, it's sort of a speculation into machine-mediated relationships and what it could mean to feel touched by an encounter that we cannot really we cannot really understand. I'm trying to play a lot with generated text where I use machine learning models based on different kinds of data. But what I'm trying to do here is trying to see, even though these entities, these almost deity-looking entities are abstract and futuristic, like, does it kind of expose us to this ability to still feel that there is some sort of connection between these two entities as they sometimes converse, sometimes make no sense. And I kind of wanted to give the agency to the audience to see, if they change the seed text, what kind of happens. So I definitely encourage you to explore and see whether, to see what these entities and what they try to talk about, how they affect you. So definitely check that out and all of the other artworks that we have on the exhibition. So now it's off for me to introduce our wonderful panelists today. So first off is Paula Strunden. She is both a designer and researcher that is particularly interested in exploring this imaginary potential of architecture between the virtual and the physical realms. So she's perfect at this idea of dissolving these kinds of binaries that we have between, the real and the digital. So as you can see on the left is her work Micro Utopia, which was a room scale VR installation, as well as her soft bodies collaboration called Weightless Bricks. And we'll definitely be talking about these works in conjunction with some of these binaries and some of the works in the exhibition today as well. Our second panelist is Julia Greenway, and she is a independent curator originally from Detroit, and she focuses on how digital media influences the aesthetic presentation of gender, economics, and the environment. And she most recently was involved in helping create Spur.world, which is this online, it's even itself, it's a hybrid space of being both a residency and an exhibition space, which has been really fascinating. And as well, she's independently curated some exhibitions in early 2020 as well. And you can see there's definitely some connections that you can see even aesthetically in the way that she's creating these works. And finally, but not least, is Ibiye Camp. And Ibiye's work focuses on sort of investigating new technologies and how that's related to the built environment. And she utilizes architectural tools like photogrammetry to create sound, video, and augmented reality to highlight the biases and conflicts of technology. And you can see this is some stills and stuff from her work, Data, the Black Gold, which we'll definitely be talking about in conjunction with Third Space. So to give it away and allow the panelists to talk, and we're going to have an awesome discussion today, I first wanted to start off the conversation by thinking about, to Paula and Ibiye, what are your approaches and thoughts behind hybrid spaces? Because I noticed that this is something that is very integral to your practices, but I think that you explore and touch on it in different ways in your work. So up to you, Paula and Ibiye, whether you'd like to go first. I don't mind.
Oh, I was just unmuting. I wasn't saying to go first. So in response to kind of how I work with hybrid spaces, it's quite interesting just kind of exploring everyone's work in the show, and also Paula and Julia, the work that you've been doing. I've realized that maybe my work is still in such early stages, and I believe that the way that I've been looking at hybrid spaces is exactly kind of what you described just now, Yasmin, of the way that we use architectural tools in reality. So I'm really interested in how data kind of manifests itself in the landscape, and like it's particularly maybe AR, which I've been kind of using. And I think that when you kind of see the kind of clash between like computer kind of CGI immersed into the real world, this kind of hybrid reality, if we want to call it that, it kind of exposes issues which are already existing. And before we were just having a little short discussion kind of about unwritten history and new languages, and I feel like this kind of technological language that is shown through this hybrid kind of shows the imbalances and shows maybe the glitches of development of technology, which is from a huge kind of history of photography and coding and, you know, imbalances within the computer industry. So the hybrid world that I'm kind of working in, or my thoughts on the hybrid world, is that it's tension, and yeah, it kind of unleashes these kind of questions into the technologies that we live with today. So it's a very kind of wishy-washy kind of response, but yeah.
It's really exciting how, as well, I think in this piece, the Data Black Gold specifically, you're almost flipping the roles, where you allow the user, you allow almost the person that gets their data harvested to take back some kind of agency. And so it's like this hybrid world also gets flipped around. And I think that's interesting what you're trying to do there. And yeah, even though you may think that it's in early works, I think it's really going, it's going through interesting paths. So Paula, what do you think about how you work and how you think about hybrid spaces?
I think what's really important for me is to see this relationship between the virtual and the actual as a gradient, and that you have like these virtual environments on one pole and you have these real environments on the other, and they are all kind of potential combination, loopholes, transformation that can happen within these poles somehow. And I think within architecture, my interest has always been within this this notion of the ephemeral and like the effect and the sensation. And I think these are really the moment when the kind of like, yeah, intuitive emotive response is the strongest to these environments. So I'm very interested working with virtual reality to not perceive it as a technology that has been invented, yeah, now, but really as something that has always been part of our way of like building and inhabiting spaces. And I think there's one really beautiful article by an artist and designer, Christian Grothuizen, and he wrote about like faith and virtuality, looking at the history of VR, describing it as or describing the Gothic cathedral as a virtual experience, or like a virtual space, through the way how like light and shade interact and really really play with effect and sensations within the viewer. And I think that's a very kind of inspiring approach to me as an architectural designer, to see virtual environments and to not see them as something that are created by the devices or like the technology, but as something that is really part of everybody's kind of spatial experience.
Part of it's not just, it's almost like the relationship between what you're experiencing, like the technology, and the person is kind of what creates that actual experience. It's not separated from the person. And I really enjoy how with Paula, you know, you're very intrigued about how we can kind of, how we experience it with multiple senses. You know, it's VR is not just about being able to see different things, but it's also about, you know, being able to interact with objects in different kinds of ways. I kind of wanted to ask you as well a follow-up question of how do you kind of, I'm just particularly interested in how you're kind of thinking about how you can virtually even work together and have these shared spaces, not just like artistic experiences, but also actually being able to work in a virtual space. I was wondering, you know, what were your thoughts behind that?
I think it came a bit from the observation that at the moment most of our digital communication is purely visual, and there's a lot of information that's being lost also in what you just hinted at, this like multisensory communication that goes through the auditory, but of course very strongly through the tactile and like the olfactory, and maybe at some point even gustatory, and also the kinesthetic sense that is like well catered by in VR. And together with John Cruz from Soft Bodies, we're really interested in creating an environment where also other senses can be communicated and explored by several people who are not within the same physical environment, so that there's still some form of multisensory physical interaction. And I think, in general, the approach is quite like, phenomenological, like really thinking of how do we perceive space like in the first place somehow, and how do all our senses play together and interact with each other, and how we perceive our reality in this like synesthetic and multimodal way, and to take that into these mixed reality experience, and not only by the virtual environment, but also by creating these physical objects. So these sentient objects that have a voice, that have a character, like that have a certain mood, that kind try to seduce you to interact with them. And then what's really important is the moment you do so, for example, I don't know, you pick something up, there's the weight of the object, there's its texture, it has a certain temperature, the material, it has a certain smell, I don't know, you can try licking it, that might remind you on something. So there's all this information that is embedded within the object and the materiality that really can give additional, can kind of augment the communication you have with somebody, especially when being apart or kind of separated physically. It doesn't mean that there are no physical ways of communicating, or it might mean it today, but we're trying to like overcome that.
Trying to have physical experiences that are communicated through digital spaces, or augmented, they are augmented. And I think that's really exciting to be able to be able to move through a physical world and do physical things with the aid of this, you know, hybrid digital world. And I think that's super interesting. I wanted to kind of highlight or bring into this other work by Ashley in another third year. And this work is called Browsing Copy. And Browsing Copy uses a pix-to-pix machine learning technology as a performative rebuilding of exhibition spaces from spatial textures. As you see on the right, what she tries to do is she takes these images of different exhibition spaces, she cuts out bits, and she tries to get the computer to fill in these gaps. And I think what's particularly interesting is that this kind of work, it almost produces itself as this browsing copy of a speculative archive. And I think if you look on the left, I think it's particularly interesting how she actually creates this kinetic installation that uses these blinds to play with the idea that as these blinds open with these motors, you're uncovering this this real space that then gets then gets, you know, once again covered by this virtual space. And I just thought it's particularly interesting how she's playing around with with allowing us to both see both spaces. So what I kind of wanted to move to was how does this in a physical way as an installation, it's not just it doesn't just become an image, a rebuilding image, but it's also actually playing around with that physical space as well. So I found that I feel like that it does tie in with some of your work, Paula, as well as Ibiye, with the way that you're trying. I think it's interesting about, you know, how you use the negative space in your work as well. And I think we mentioned that before, how we're allowing this we're allowing also space to be unfilled sometimes.
Definitely. Like what's really interesting about Ashley's work here that we're looking at is the way that the computer is kind of selecting kind of a space and then kind of, you know, being informed by maybe AI or something in order to fill the rest of the picture that's abstracted. And I find that super interesting. And when we're talking about like kind of hybrid spaces as well, like how a computer kind of makes up its own geometry or kind of tries to fix a mistake or something like that. That's super beautiful. And the way that Ashley's kind of then placed this into back into a moving kind of installation, in this kinetic installation that kind of reveals the computer image and then the kind of absence of the image is super interesting. Yeah,
definitely. I think I wanted to also move on to thinking about this other work as well, which is by my peer Georgie Hodges. And this is very different than Browsing Copy, because this is, as you can see, laser engraved, almost like a architectural model. And this is Georgie's piece, Bermondsey Spa, which is kind of thinking a lot about deconstructing and destigmatizing council housing. And it's very particularly like hyper local and personal to her, because this is almost depicting, you know, the panoramic view from her window, because she was shielding for much of last year. So I think I want to kind of use this piece as a jumping off point to think about, I think about how architecture, what is architecture's responsibility towards towards gentrification, or even in more general terms like civic politics, and how that's very much intertwined with someone's, you know, personal personal life. And I was wondering whether anyone has any thoughts on on architecture's responsibility for for civic politics and how people interact in in the world and in the city, because it's very, I think it has many different experiences for different people. Perhaps even maybe thinking about how when you did your work on the East Street Market and thinking about upcycled materials, and maybe try to think about how that maybe fits in or goes against Bermondsey Spa.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I think from what I can tell from the imagery, so it's essentially almost like a flat, kind of like a set design, which I find super interesting. The point of view that oh, sorry, what was their name? Georgie. Sorry, yeah. Georgie's work has taken, and I guess the way that I can relate to this is through the project I did in East Street Market. I was working with walking through public space and kind of documenting I had documented East Street Market in 2019, and then with AR during lockdown, I then applied the data that I collected of the markets and the open kind of shops back into what was then in 2020 an empty market that wasn't kind of functioning. So it was kind of a sense of question of nostalgia, placing what was once there, like something that was familiar back in. So what was really interesting about using technology and AR is that, you know, it allowed me to kind of be almost reminiscent of what the space once was, but also question how the most crowded areas in London would then kind of reopen and start again. And, you know, the piece was kind of talking about formation and how, you know, how the market stalls, you know, they're always on a kind of bit of a ritual, the way that they are set up and everything. So again, I was kind of trying to walk through the space with these AR kind of mesh photogrammetry stalls, and they were kind of almost like floating in the space. So it's quite kind of maybe a similar aesthetic to Georgie here of the model, but it's just from one point of view, and it's slightly like if you saw it from another angle, it would possibly disappear. So yeah, it's a super beautiful work, and yeah, I think that what architecture can do with virtual reality and like these hybrid spaces, that it can question point of view, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's nice to hear, because I had very similar thoughts seeing that work, and it was really because before also you were saying that she was kind of, it's her point of view from her window, like while being like locked at home. And when I saw it for the first time, it felt almost a bit like the point of view of a brick within this facade, or like the point of view of like the window frame or something like that. And if it would be like another element within the house, it would be totally different perspective. And yeah, I agree. Like, I think it's one of the most kind of crucial points of working with these immersive technologies is that you can basically allow yourself or others to embody these other perspectives, and it doesn't have to be other human perspective. It can really be other things. And I think what this can teach us, or like what we can learn through doing that, is really interesting. I think, yeah, also for future students' work, I think a huge kind of topic of inquiry. Yeah,
it's really interesting to think about ephemeral art as well, and time. So it's like maybe this point of view that Georgie has from the window, what might not be there, and it's the same thing of like scanning spaces is kind of a moment in time.
And I think definitely, you know, even her own view is in constant flux because of everything that, you know, it never stays the same, this panorama. So I think it's nice that she created these laser engravings to kind of be like, you know, this is physical and real for now. And I think what's particularly interesting about a lot of these artworks in the exhibition is that, in a way, when we create these works, we're almost creating our own version of a world that we're trying to create. So I kind of wanted to think a lot about what's our role or our responsibility when we are creating these sorts of multiverses, or you know, trying to think about, you know, what's our responsibility of world building, because so much of it can be top down from our artist or curator's perspective. How can we think about how it's being experienced by the audience or by other people? So maybe Julia, you could think about how when you're curating, and what's sort of the expectations, or what's the sort of expectations that you have when you're trying to create work together, and your opinion on world building. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you mean like in general, or do you mean exclusively like in a digital context?
I would love to hear about both.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all very like contextual, like like and circumstantial, of course. I mean, I think thinking about projects like Joey Holder's Semel Paris and that disused pool, that was very much a project that was explicitly responding to the uniqueness of that site, and the work kind of evolved and came about as a result of its venue. So I think that these, obviously, from a curatorial perspective, like I very much have always felt that like the space or the construct or the venue was my medium, and I was responsible for bringing in the artists that I was interested in having a discourse with, and helping to support them to respond to that medium, because my practice has largely been kind of conceptualizing site-specific installations by digital artists. And a lot of my early practice was helping facilitate these artists with digital practices to bring their work into a physical space for the first time. So it was very much like, how do we invite the viewer and the public into the experience of your work, and what do we want that experience to be, and how do we want them to feel and engage with the work? So I've always been very excited to like really place the viewer and immerse them into these really encapsulating experiences, both with, my project space in Seattle and kind of these pop-up projects I've been doing independently. It's always been about like really putting the viewer in the work directly. Yeah. And so now that we're, my practice and most of us is largely shifted to presenting work digitally, I've been sort of thinking about how to replicate that within a digital space and in a digital environment. And I think Spur is a great example that you mentioned. And that was a really exciting and unique project where it was, so it started as a residency program. It was started by Joey Holder and Megan Broadmeadow, as sort of a response to lockdowns and students losing, obviously their degree shows and so forth. So they created this platform for artists to work as digital avatars, and there was workshops and exchanges, and it was kind of like a self-made like social media space. But the artists were anonymous throughout the residency period, and they were just sort of building work and communicating through these avatars. And then I was sort of tasked to come in and be like, how do we invite the public into this like very collective kind of hive mind space? And, how can we make that experience as interactive as possible? So we really sort of collectively came to this idea that we could have each of the artists conceptualize the worlds of their avatars. So what is their subconscious space? What is the space that their avatars would inhabit? So each of the artists ended up producing these very interactive worlds within Unity, which is essentially like these cohesive environments for their like pseudo identities. So that's an example where we made the space, where that kind of exhibition space was facilitated by the artists themselves. And then, trying to find a way to bring the public into that, to make it as sort of engaging and immersive as possible. But yeah, that's a long answer.
It's awesome. I think it's awesome how each artist was almost very specific in how they wanted to create their own space. And I genuinely loved that these kinds of avatars, they were almost microbial. They're definitely not of this world, and I'm particularly interested in how, you know, we can represent ourselves as, you know, not being anthropomorphic in the digital world. I think that can be really limiting in the way that we express ourselves. You know, as you said, these artists were these anonymous bacteriums. So I think it was really cool how I'm sure that these artists that were involved and creating this work, you know, when you were on that platform and you were inhabiting that avatar, you know, you were no longer, you were part of this world together, and I think that's really cool, and I wish I got involved, but
we're gonna do 2.0, so you can get good.
So yeah, but perhaps I kind of wanted to think to Julia as well, and to Paula and Ibiye, when you're kind of, you know, of course, when you're creating these works, you have your own perspective, as we were talking about with Georgie's, you know, it's this own very temporal and ephemeral kind of perspective. I was kind of thinking that, do you ever feel that because it's almost authored by yourself, there's no what element do you think that there is for the audience when they experience your work to kind of you know, thinking about how do you make sure that they're able to view the work or interact with your practice in their own way as well. So I was thinking more about how do you make sure that when people interact with your work or think about your practice, that in a way that they're being almost taken care of, or they're being directed properly. So that's a bit of a broad question, but yeah.
I'm happy to start, maybe. I think, like, linking to what Julia was saying before, because I think it's so interesting how you described that this physical experience can somehow be recreated by this moment of like witnessing in real time, and that like strong level of interactivity. And I think that's really crucial. I think this like temporal aspect is that you, like, when you have visitors coming into your pieces, and whether it's digital or physical or like something in between, like it's really about this immediacy and like this this kind of these like moments of togetherness that you're creating. And I think especially working with like VR, AR, it becomes, or it turns a lot around the idea of trust, I think. And like I don't know, for example, in the works that I do, the role of the invigilator is super crucial, and I spend almost more time like speaking to them and introducing them to the work. And it's so important for me that I do that personally, and that that they kind of maybe not then copy me or like my attitude towards it, but that they really develop like their own understanding of the work, and that they are able to communicate it within their own ways and find the things that they like about it or not. And I think so there this idea of trust comes in. But I think it's that, and then within like this moment of witnessing, it's somehow in real time, and it's, I think, different for everybody doing that, and every kind of combination creates its own experience again.
I think you almost become, I guess, when you're explaining to these people that are interacting with your works, you become almost this guide. You're like, this is how you can travel through this space, and how you can learn to be in this world. So I think that's a really interesting role that you end up taking, and perhaps is very, do you think it's almost crucial to have that because of the medium of this VR work, that in order for people to be able to actually experience it or get something, to get something, whole from it?
Well, I think if you build mixed reality installation, VR is not a visual technology that puts you in a purely visual environment like watching a film, but VR is rather covering your sight from so it makes people, I think, just in the first moment kind of insecure to start moving, to start interacting, to start touching things. So I think that like guiding hand almost is really nice to have around if it works. I don't know, for example, there's an image of weightless collaboration, and it was really interesting because you go together in the same virtual environment while being physically apart, like with another physical body. and you meet inside, and there we actually experience that it can be quite disturbing to have like another kind of virtual, like physical virtual present within the same environment, because you create these situations because you're not like you have like these two setups, but you like embody the same virtual environment. So you can be in a situation where somebody, for example, moves the object through your waist, or like, you know, I don't know, walks through you, or so there, this closeness, I think, can also become problematic, like in this like uncanny sense somehow. So I think, yeah, it's like something to kind of carefully consider, and also to learn while doing, of course.
Of course, that's really yeah, that's really an interesting element of that weightless collaboration as well. What do you guys think, Ibiye and Julia, about this element of almost caregiving when you're bringing people into your space to experience your artwork or your practice? Or it doesn't come into your head. Maybe you want it to be fully their own agency.
Yeah, I feel like I need to, again, this is something where I'm just like, I need to reconsider some parts of my practice, because yeah, like how do you care for people viewing your work is a really interesting question. I think because my work is more on the augmented side, so it doesn't, I guess you don't feel as vulnerable as the VR. Like I've had times when I've used the VR in the past where, you know, it's so overwhelming and you're really enjoying the space that you're in, and when you come back out, you're like, oh, I'm just in this kind of grey room and I was just in this fantastic space with floating objects. So you know, there is a huge kind of emotional journey you go on using VR. In my work, I haven't done anything like that yet, but I guess there's an interesting idea of the augmented reality, is that you have to kind of make things that are augmentable, or, you know, so I always find it interesting with target imagery, like what kind of seems like a target image, or a lot of my work is activated through like maybe a tablet or iPad. So you kind of I usually have the tablet or iPad as an element in the installation that is there for someone to be used. And I think one thing is that maybe the setup is quite approachable. It's never super techy. The way that I work is quite informal. So I think maybe an element of care is to like make something that isn't so intimidating, and I really leave the work so that people could find the target images themselves. Like sometimes someone could interact with my work and not see any target imagery because they haven't engaged with it. But if someone's like curious with the installation and they start to move around the stand that has the tablet attached to it, then, you know, the narrative is revealed. So it's really maybe too suggestive. Maybe, you know, someone might be missing out on kind of interacting with the work because they just don't want to kind of damage the iPad, which they wouldn't, but it's just about being curious in the space. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you say that about yeah, the audience or people that look at your artwork, you know, they don't want to touch it because you're almost in this exhibition space where you have this social contract where you're not meant to interfere with things. But I think a lot with yeah, digital experiences, it's kind of like it's a lot about probing and being curious. So yeah, I think that it's interesting that we kind of have to break down this idea in the exhibition that we're not meant to touch things. I think that I'm really particularly interested in very interactive and sometimes like unintentionally creating, or, you know, making the artwork actually created. Yeah. Not sure, Julia, if you have anything to say on that.
I mean, I think those are all like great and important points. And I've always made accessibility the forefront of my practice, and making sure that, you know, if it's an in-person interaction, that it's really easy to use, and that there is, like, I think these guided methods, especially with VR and these kind of advanced technologies, like people really need to be sort of handheld through that process so they feel comfortable, so they feel supported. And in terms of presenting projects digitally, I think that's true as well. I mean, I think Spur is a great project, but I also acknowledge that not every viewer is going to want to wait for a Unity to load in their browser and is going to be comfortable with like a web-based game. Like, so one way that we're tackling that actually is we have a partnership program where we have other organizations hosting Spur. And I've had all of the artists make these sort of walkthrough videos of their worlds so that we can make their worlds accessible to people that maybe don't want to enter and don't want to have the interactivity, because it's not going to be for everybody. And not everybody's going to want to make these big commitments to invest and divulge into like a 15 level multiverse. Like, I'm very aware of like the fatigue that we're all experiencing. So for me, like I very much see my role as a facilitator, as somebody that can bring the public into these works. So like, I'm always like, how do we make this accessible? How do we make this easy for people to use it? And being very aware of like who our audiences are and who we're trying to reach. So I think especially really shifting to working digitally, I'm very much kind of still figuring out a lot of those things and trying, I have a lot of kind of feedback and like decompression from these past projects to be like, who's actually going to this stuff and what sort of feedback are we getting, so that we can continue to improve that engagement and our audiences as well. So I think it's very much a work in progress, but.
Definitely. I mean, we had this exact same dilemma when we were trying to create this online exhibition, because we want it to be so expansive. We want it to be like, I don't know, we're going to have the work not on walls. We're going to have it, I don't know, doing something crazy. But in the end, we decided, we're going to have a 2D exhibition page where we're going to allow people to, see images and videos of the work. And then also, if it's hosted online, to be able to go and interact with it. So we wanted to strip it back, because we were seeing so many 3D environments, and not only that, we probably didn't have the capacity to create it, but we also felt like there was just so many, it was very baffling for us to even navigate some of these worlds. So yeah, we were kind of, some of us really wanted a 3D world, some of us strictly wanted this kind of website. So I'm actually really happy in the end that we were like, we're going to keep it 2D and we're going to keep it accessible. And I think that in the end, I think it's something that just allows more people to kind of experience it without feeling, like you said, this kind of, sometimes you don't want to explore through this 3D world, and you want something that's a bit more easier to manage. So I think
just one thing to that topic, because I think it's so interesting thinking of this accessibility of the digital that Julia just described, and I think also as a kind of as a task or a question for future designers, because I think the affordance within which we move, like through our physical worlds, like knowing that a staircase can take us up or down, or that like a door can open to another realm, and that we know how to which direction to turn the doorknob into. And I think like all these elements, to translate them to the digital, and like defining a vocabulary that we are comfortable and confident in using, and that we can use relatively intuitively, that's such a huge task, I think, when it comes off the screens and loses its two-dimensionality. And there are there are many exploration and little rules so far. So I think that's also a huge question, of course, concerning that topic of care, if you think of accessibility in terms of affordances. And
definitely. And
I also think now that with essentially everybody producing online program or online content, that there very much has to be these considerations of, why is this project online, and what are we gaining by taking this project online? Like, what else can we show that we wouldn't be able to show in person? Who can we reach who we wouldn't be able to reach in person? I think these are really important questions that I'm not sure that everyone is asking quite yet. That I think, if in terms of building like a digital space or a digital kind of public facing program, that there's all of these questions that need to be answered, and like at the forefront, why is this online? why are you presenting it in this way? And what are you giving your audience that they could not have in person? And I think if you're not hitting those marks, that you're not, you're not giving the medium the best platform it deserves. So I'm very much kind of trying to ask those myself and push the projects that are going to be online, and be like, okay, but what are we doing that's unique here?
Yeah.
So
definitely. And I think we're still trying to understand this medium of the internet and what we're capable of doing. And, are we just going to translate our physical lives and, like Paula said, these habits that we have of how we turn doors and how we move through space? I think we have to reconsider and think about how we can use the internet and use that internet space. Firstly, that I wanted to remind everyone, and I completely forgot to say in the beginning, if you guys have any questions at all or any comments, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll be asking them out at the end if there's any. So definitely feel free. If you've got any questions for Paula, Julia, or Ibiye, we would love to have them. I kind of wanted to move our conversation into the direction of intimacy, because I think for me, my work, well, at least what I've been working on in the past year, has been very interested in digital intimacy, or what it means to feel close to something or someone. And I think that your guys' practices kind of looks at proximity and closeness in different kinds of ways. And yeah, I think for me is I got interested in this idea or this concept because I was playing around with chatbots on my phone for my dissertation, and I was absolutely amazed at how people were having genuine, real relationships with digital avatars, with literally an app on your phone. And I think it kind of made me rethink, what does it actually mean to have a relationship? What does it mean, if in the future we're no longer just being close to ourselves as humans, and perhaps it's becoming so much more about self-reflection, and maybe we're not so intimate with each other anymore, but there are different kinds of ways. So I kind of wanted to bring that topic and maybe think about how that's relevant or expressed differently in your practices, or is that even something that you think about when you're making work? Yeah.
I mean, I can say personally, if we're not friends on the internet, are we really friends? Are we, if we don't have an in-person relationship and an internet relationship, are we really?
So what's an internet relationship to you, Julia?
I mean, just somebody I text all the time and we send each other memes or something. Yeah. If we don't have a meme exchange, we're not really friends.
Yeah. You're tethered virtually.
Yeah. Yeah.
By this communication. I think that's really interesting. That's cool.
I mean, but in terms of building intimacy in my practice, I guess, I mean, I very much, I think that, that's always the intimacy for my practice comes from collaboration and partnership. So I've been doing that. I've been still building that, with people on a digital plane this last year in actually a really new kind of an exciting way. So to build Spur, that's a collective, and I just was working with students in Northampton to build their degree show, and I just met them in person the other day. I'm like, oh my God, this is we're breaking the wall down, you guys. I think it becomes, because I've had all these collaborations that have been exclusively built digitally, and I'm sure we can all relate to that now. And I've always, I mean, I very much value and cherish the ability to do that. So I'm hoping to continue to push it and to see if those boundaries can be extended, if I can work with people, even in a much wider international space through a digital exchange, I think is really an exciting prospect as well. So
definitely. Yeah. I don't know if Ibiye or Paula have any ways that they think about intimacy.
I think I'm still working on it. Yeah, I'm obviously, like everyone, still working online, sharing memes and not vines, just like kind of, you know, IGTV kind of like skits and all kind of things online is kind of like an everyday part of my life, I would say. I have a little, not little, but a collective with friends from the RCA, Excessive Aesthetics, where we're kind of constantly questioning digital infrastructures and public space. And we started from the RCA and like continued on from our studio there in kind of digital language. And right now we're thinking about sound and kind of the intimacy of sound kind of online. This initially came from thinking about how we show aspects of care at the moment. And I think there's something really amazing with ASMR, like sound in a VR space, or just general kind of listening to a podcast jingle every day that makes you feel kind of like secure or something. So there's like an element of familiarity or sound, which I find really interesting, which I'm starting to incorporate into my practice. And I think I show kind of care or intimacy through a lot of the sound field recordings that I've worked with. So this is like just small little elements which are in my practice. But again, as a general conversation, there is like a kind of sound which me and everyone in Excessive Aesthetics have been talking about, which is, you know, sounds from home. A lot of us are speaking on Zoom all the time. And one of us might live on a main road, so you always hear the sirens kind of going past and stuff like that. So, you know that kind of Jade is at home or something like that. So yeah, I think sound is a huge part of intimacy, is about where you are, kind of your space around you, your surroundings. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's actually quite a few artworks in this exhibition as well that use sound. I mean, Bermondsey Spa, Georgie, in a way, did a field recording because she just took her phone out and recorded whatever was going on outside of her window. So you heard like a cacophony of birds, and then you heard this like ice cream van coming around. And it's like you said, it's this, this familiarity, this nostalgia as well of how sound can create memories or remind you of things. And I think it's interesting that that's definitely been used in a lot of artworks in this exhibition. Yeah.
I think for my practice, I'm super interested in exploring this idea of intimacy through the relationship that I enter with materials. So it kind of, I think it comes a bit from this like new materialist perspective, and like really asking like, asking or it's difficult to describe, but like this possibilities through VR. And like I work a lot with lead motion, so you have the hand tracking, so your hands are made from a certain material, the objects you interact with that are tracked are made from the same, and then suddenly the environment you're immersed in is also from that. So it's really to like flatten these ontologies and to kind of embed yourself within these new form of materials, and how that creates like an intimacy in the conversation you enter with these things or environments that is maybe difficult to understand or to grasp in our purely physical world. And I think that touches. There were two work. I think there was like from Francesca Brielli. I can't pronounce the name.
Yes.
And from like Zoe Palmer. I think both of them worked with this combination of like, I think with Francesca, she had this like beautiful touch on this like visual tactility. And there was also something that I observed in your work, that it kind of, like it brings these senses together, and you're just wondering like, hey, why is that so beautiful? Like, why does it feel like I can get so close to that? I can like touch it, and like, it almost feels like you can taste the work somehow. And I think with Zoe, it was similar, this combination of the animation with the sound that, so I think there's something, I don't know, for me within intimacy is like when you can enter on a kind of on an unexpected road to other kind of contents, that you might have not done before, or like it creates this like, I don't know, like little like magical road between you and something.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. It's through not only the interplay of senses, but also, like you said, yeah, not quite being prepared for what you're about to experience. I kind of wanted to just clarify with you, Paula, what exactly did you mean by flattening the ontology? Is this come from when you're creating these virtual worlds? You're trying to allow the users to understand how these things come into being. I'm curious if, what flattening the ontology really means. Yeah, for you.
Yeah, I think in my understanding, it has to do with agency and kind of allowing other things to have a presence within these experiences. And these things don't have to be other people. They can be other sentient objects that have a voice, that have a character, but they can also be elements like, I don't know, materialities in themselves, like aspects of, for example, light, or even time itself can become like this agent within the experience that you can start controlling or like reversing. So I think to just start seeing as many kind of graspable concepts as possible, just as these kind of like presences among yourself within these worlds, and kind of acknowledging that you're just like one of many within these environments.
Yeah, I think it is particularly fascinating, and you have touched on this a little bit before, but maybe we can kind of explore deeper, your use of sentient objects, or how, because personally, I'm particularly interested in, I guess, not having this hierarchy between like an AI virtual assistant and yourself, because I've been doing research basically on how, how Alexa and Google Home and all these things, you're kind of talking and communicating with this soul agent that is almost like almost a monotheistic kind of God role. Whereas I was kind of I kind of want to explore what it means to have many different kinds of companions, or different entities that that don't have all of this knowledge put into one. And I think particularly I'm intrigued by this idea of animism in these non-living kind of objects. I mean, it's kind of what I tried to imbue in my amorphous butterfly piece, but I think, Paula, you also do that in the way that these objects are almost living, and I think it kind of makes you feel more connected to this world that's being built. And I think it would be nice for many different kinds of objects to just be able to communicate between them, and to have this kind of to have these kinds of very individual personalities in this world that we try to build in, perhaps in the future. I don't know if Julia and Ibiye, what are your thoughts, and whether you've thought much about what it means for objects to be able to communicate with us in a more seamless kind of way, perhaps through language and something like that. Yeah. Maybe it's not something that's popped in too much, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I haven't worked with AI completely. I think that it's super, super fascinating, and it's something that I want to start to develop, this kind of humanoid or non-human entity of some sort, and kind of questioning maybe the data pools and like the ethics of the whole thing. Maybe like, I'm kind of doing some research with the RCA kind of about kind of humanoid or non-human kind of avatars, and how we are like kind of trying to inject ourselves into this industry, which is very much based upon kind of maybe North American white male coders kind of information and stuff. So maybe what we are starting to do is rethinking how the AI kind of reads us. And I'm sure like a lot of people know about the kind of biases that are in facial recognition and stuff like that. So it's really interesting, because I've been looking at the AI and the avatars, and it's kind of like, it's not the AI or the avatars like fault, it's kind of like the human fault, is that the way that they act. And so what's really interesting is just the data that is fed into how one kind of technological being kind of interacts with another. It's still kind of down to us. And so I found it really interesting, Yasmin, with your project, of what you were saying, how you were kind of like looking at the way that bots talk to one another, and it's because of humans, that the way that the bots kind of build that relationship, like it's purely informed by us. And so I think, how do we get the bot or the avatar, or whatever, to start kind of making its own code or its own kind of like database or something? And that's where maybe we might have a different kind of being created. That is something that we haven't quite manufactured from our human understandings and our human beliefs. And yeah, it's super interesting. I'm very much on the edge of it, but I think that the way that I look at things, I'm quite intimidated by technology that looks like human, because so I'm quite interested in blurred imagery, or things that are slightly kind of glitched, or maybe low res, and working with that kind of understanding. But if something's like super kind of like human looking, it's I don't know, it's maybe, yeah,
Uncanny.
I'm still figuring it out. It's uncanny, but it's also maybe slightly unimaginative. I want to see what the computer makes, what the mistakes that the computer makes, the geometry that the computer comes up with. So yeah, I think one computer informing another computer, and that conversation is super exciting, I think.
Definitely. I think it's interesting that, yeah, we're not at this space where we can allow, or where we can have some sort of machine or entity be able to build itself from the bottom up. We don't know whether that's completely possible, or whether we want that to happen, or whether the machine wants that to happen. It's all these kinds of dilemmas that are coming up. And I think with my piece specifically is I definitely say that it's very speculative, and it's imagining something rather than actually expressing that this is actually a relationship. Because I think that I don't want to try to anthropomorphize what artificial intelligence is, because at the very like Ibiye, you said, at the moment it is completely constructed by human code and glorify statistics in a way. So we're not at that point now, but I'm trying to think about what it could possibly be like, in that, to have something that that can communicate from itself.
Yeah,
it's really exciting.
Will that ever happen? I really want it to, but yeah, or maybe not. I don't know, it could be scary, but
But I think that technology can be used as a really interesting prompt, like as you have done, Yasmin. Like there's a language and a speculative sort of way of being that can then kind of incur this artist response, and we can build and contextualize it within art making. Because I think these machine learning or these AI, they're not really that smart yet. They're not able to really kind of do the things that we like imagine that they could do. My project with Gary Georgieva at Qubit was in response to an algorithm that I made of the institution's archive. And the algorithm was like completely ridiculous and nonsensical. And I was like, well, this is like worthless. Like I need to but it did like what it was supposed to do, but it didn't have enough data because it was one institution. So it wasn't able to kind of really hold space on its own. So I was able to then bring in this artist that took this like really amazing approach to this machine learning system from an archive. So I think that got me really excited about thinking about using these systems to contextualize like something as sort of basic as an institution's archive, and like these sort of exchanges that have happened over time, and like predicting what the future is, but then having we're always going to have that human dissemination. We're always going to have somebody kind of come in and respond to these systems because we're just not there with it yet. So I think we're in that space where we can really sort of be malleable with how we respond and how we build, we build that future, right? We build that speculative space. So it's interesting.
Yeah, the human is kind of always the entry point at the moment, which is really interesting.
I think it's also a question of like how many voices are integrated within this conversation, and also how many kind of artificial voices, because there's actually a beautiful article by Keiichi Mitsuda, who did the hyper reality film about gods, and he comes from being half Japanese. He writes this article about Shinto belief, where you have kami, which are these like kind of spirits or like holy, prophets, and how they could be found within any kind of objects within your environment. And by doing that, he actually just increases the voices in your environment. And then maybe it's also okay that some of them are mean, and some of them are, stupid, and some of them are actually like trying to help you, and some of them are sweet. So I think it's really a question that at the moment we have, Siri, Alexa, and Cortana, but we can count them on one or two hands. And I think they're also the infrastructure, and just has to grow. And
I'm also particularly fascinated by what Keiichi wrote about those AI spirits almost, and I take a lot of inspiration from what he's thinking about. I think the only thing that I keep on trying to wish I could oversee was how much information this requires for a companion to be able to give you helpful advice, or be able to, coordinate my diary, or to pick up something and to make sure I remember to pick up something from the shops. At the moment, I think, the biggest problem is that we have to think about, do I want this this database, essentially what it is, to know everything about me, to know that my heart rate is increasing because I've forgotten something, and is then able to predict. I think this idea of prediction with AI, because it relies not on, as humans, we almost intuitively predict people, but I guess these machines have to be taught or coded to predict and be given information. So maybe we have to come to a point where, I don't know, do we come to a point where there's just seamless information transfer, and we don't care about privacy, or privacy changes its concepts? Like, it's a lot of things to think about, and I've definitely tried to overlook the ethical implications of what it means to converse with machines when I'm thinking about my piece. It's something that obviously I don't want to ignore forever, but it's just such a big problem, because like Ibiye, you said, this code and these technologies are created by a very small set of people, and we have to think about, we want this technology to be encompassing for everyone to be able to benefit from. So I was thinking that we might take a question from the YouTube, and there's a question from Panja. And so she's asking, how do we free bots from being fed techno-capitalist ideas? So this is a question that I would love all of you guys to try to answer, if you think. And I think this question kind of sums up what the dilemma we're facing. How can we stop bots from being fed techno-capitalist ideas?
Maybe we can start to free ourselves.
Yeah.
And being the consumers of the majority of these devices, and also of the software in the end. I think it is a starting point. I'm not saying that's a solution at all, because of course it also has to happen at other places. But I think for me, what's important to always remember, also working with these technologies, that I'm in the end providing a lot of data for these companies, and I think to continue to be very critical and aware of what we're using and how we're using it is I would say a starting point.
'Cause we're trying to critique something that we are so entangled within. And everyone talks about that, about capitalism. Yeah, there's a lot of, yeah, we're trying to think, we're not just working alone when we're creating our artworks or our practices. There is something that we're trying to achieve, to get to not be just a consumer, to not just be, yeah, part of, I don't know, this establishment. Yeah.
But as artists and producers, I think that we're very critical of all of the, I mean, we work in this plane of criticality where we are critiquing the systems that we exist within and also the technologies that we use. And as a result, we're building like a more open, accessible cultural space. So I think that just by existing and doing the work that we're doing, we're countering that in our own ways. So, I mean, we can't reshape like a lot of these systems that we exist within, but we can critique them and push against them. And we're all obviously doing that. So
yeah, I completely agree that it's just like unlearning, that we have a lot of unlearning to do, I guess. Like I love kind of using new software. Like I've just started using Unreal and I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, and I'm planning to use it in completely the wrong way. I don't really want to follow any tutorials or anything like that, and I feel like unlearning, or just kind of keep critiquing, like Julia, like you were saying. But I critique technology and data centers and its effect on the environment all the time, but I'm still kind of using technology. So I think this kind of critiquing ourselves and trying to rethink the terminologies that we use as well, and then eventually the bots maybe would have a chance, I would say.
Yeah.
But it's super nice, Ibi, what you said also about this unlearning, I think, because it has a lot to do, I think, also with education and basically teaching. And I think there's a lot of awareness throughout this whole DIY and like design movement that the agency over our physical environment is very important, and it should be kind of taught and integrated within education. But I think the agency over our digital environments is actually, going to become more and more, not more and more, but like equally important. And that's something I think very important to integrate within education, and especially with younger people as well. So to increase the accessibility, to have the chance to unlearn and try and
and being exposed to new technologies that because I mean already children are complete whizzes at iPads and typing and stuff at a very young age, but it's about giving them that critical ability to kind of see that this stuff is also able to affect your life in different kinds of ways, and is kind of becoming aware of, I think, as we become more and more aware of how data is being used in our lives, I think we will perhaps see a new generation of trying to make privacy more important, or trying to think about how we can still keep our agency and our sovereignty as individual people. I think I'm excited to see where that kind of goes with this new generation, and definitely I think artists play an important role in trying to make sure that bringing these different topics to light and looking at them in different kinds of ways, I think is really important. So I guess pat on the backs for ourselves. I have another question here from Nate Townsend. He's asking, how do you feel about machine learning being the first port of call for abstract pattern recognition with any nebulous dataset, especially its use as the basis for most new brain-computer interfaces? So, how do you feel about machine learning being the first port of call for abstract or for pattern recognition? I'm trying to think how I can perhaps reword that question. So I think he's talking especially particularly with how our mind or our actual brain is our information is being processed and being communicated by the computer. And what we're doing is we're using machine learning But what does it mean when this machine learning, which is a very, like you said, a almost dumb technology, is being used to try to represent human thought processes or human senses? That's a very deep question.
I mean, to me personally, I don't know if I understood the question right, but for me, the way how pattern recognition works and within machine learning and AI is very extremely specific and very kind of linear and maybe not linear, but kind of one directional. And so I don't have so strong feelings about it yet because it's so far off the way how humans do it or like how it works within like human minds. So I think by a computer having been fed, I don't know, a few million pictures of a cat and being able to recognize it afterwards, that's not something that would scare me directly, or I think it's still kind of understandable. But of course, it will change, I assume, and I think then maybe it will be easier also to form an opinion around that. I think for me at the moment, I'm still a bit kind of in the waiting mode to answer that question.
Yeah, I think for me is maybe as well, what does it mean to reduce our thoughts and our senses to something that is computable? I think that's what scares me is, and perhaps that's what makes AI so intriguing, is like, are we able to uncover the processes that we understand the world, or is it just it blindly copying what we feed it? So maybe we'll get to a point where, I think it is a big trying to understand how we perceive the world as well.
There are like small machine learning kind of things that come up where you have to like see if where the computer's trying to figure out if you're a bot, where it's like select where you see a bicycle. And I always get those things wrong. And like, so I'm kind of thinking to myself, I don't know, like the computer's telling me I've got that wrong, and I thought that was a bicycle, but it's telling me it's not. So it's interesting. Maybe it's like kind of analyzing us as well, like for what we recognize to be like a bicycle or a car or flat or traffic lights or something like that. I don't know if I didn't really understand the question, I guess, but I think that there's these moments of machine learning which are so basic that even I don't understand them. So I don't know, that's my response.
No, I think what they actually try to detect when you do those images is they try to detect where your mouse is clicking. Like a bot clicks in the middle of the image, but a human never clicks precisely in the middle. I might be wrong, but that's something I heard. They're actually trying to, I think a robot clicks too fast and too perfectly. So it's
so maybe it's saying I'm too perfect.
Yeah,
I think maybe you got it wrong.
That's so funny.
So I also have another question from Georgie Hodges, and she has a question perhaps more directed to Ibiye's practice, but she was intrigued by the kinds of technology that you used in architectural spaces, and she wants to ask, what inspired you to use these tools? Was it like photogrammetry, for example?
Yeah, for sure. So it's mainly like kind of scanning software that I was working with, and initially I was working on a different project. So like the way I was working on like two, as you do during your studies, you're working on multiple different things, and so I was looking at how people could kind of harness their own data, like the restitution of public data in Lagos. And then I wasn't sure how I was going to do this, whether it was going to be like personal like IP routes, or I wasn't too sure. And then I started scanning kind of the markets. Kind of maybe it was an entry point. I can't quite remember what my thought process was, but when I started scanning Balogun market, which is a major market in Lagos in Nigeria, I got kind of like all of these really exciting scans back, because obviously there's a lot of movement and a lot of kind of maybe like contrasting light and all these kind of things. And then when I started to really look into what photogrammetry software entails for you to get a good scan, it says that it can't scan things that are black, things that are shiny, things that aren't kind of evenly lit, things that are moving. And so there are all of these kind of criterias that you needed in order to create a scan. So then I found that the point where I was going to like think about how people can keep their data and have kind of maybe you know, a little bit of resistance to technology were the busiest spaces. And so that's kind of like where the critique of the architectural scanning tools came into the work. And yeah, it was kind of a bunch of various different avenues and ideas of research. And then it kind of came to kind of the busiest public spaces and realizing how a public space isn't quite what you want to use for a perfect scan of a sculpture or a kind of European kind of cathedral building that's like lit beautifully by the sun. And you know, it's like it was these types of things where I realized that scanning didn't quite work. And even with myself, my introduction into 3D scanning, you know, when you're kind of speaking to the technicians and learning how the software works, they did a scan of me, and everything came out apart from my hair, because my hair was too curly, or the way that the scans work is that it's like measurements and distance, and so they recognize the surface, but then computing curly hair in that way didn't quite kind of work. So you got kind of a scan of me with like a void around my head. And so it was moments like this I realized I wanted to kind of like start to investigate how the scanning systems work.
Yeah, thanks, Ibiye. I think it's really fascinating that, yeah, you're exploring how the technology fails at what it's most meant to do, and you know, all the discrepancies that they have. Yeah, and I think that was an awesome question. So I think we have one final question from Rachel, and this brings us back to has the digital mediation of what we previously called intimacy actually expanded and made intimacy public property in a way? That's kind of an interesting question.
Could you repeat it, please? Just didn't catch the beginning.
Has the digital mediation of what we previously called intimacy actually expanded and made intimacy public property? So the transference of what we consider intimacy in the digital realms, or you know, over social media, has it made intimacy public property? Or maybe what does that mean exactly? Yeah.
I mean, yes. I mean, I think if we're engaging on these platforms, we don't have necessarily like ownership over our content once it's shared. So in that regard, I think yes. But I don't know in terms of like the repercussions of that. I don't know if like what that is or how we would gauge that. Because I personally haven't felt that myself. You know, I think that I very much am engaged with these platforms quite consistently and intimately and willingly. So
it's interesting, isn't it? Like maybe it makes kind of a type of intimacy public, but then you do have a choice, I guess. Like a lot of people have like a alter ego, or you know, the way that they present themselves digitally is completely different to their kind of present kind of non-digital self. So maybe the digital self is kind of a public kind of, you have some sort of public responsibility with that, like revealing certain intimacies in that sense. But I think I personally feel like I have a choice of that. Like I maybe yeah, you can be selective still. I hope there might be, but then maybe the digital self is completely kind of exposed to the public.
I like the term also of expanded, because I think that's something that has happened. I think like it has expanded the possibilities in which to be intimate, and I wouldn't kind of judge that as being positive or negative. I think it's, yeah, it probably comes back also to what Ibiye said. It's like just maybe it has become more complicated to make that choice, and maybe the possibilities have expanded or grown, like for the better or worse.
Yeah, definitely. I think the way that I'm intimate in a public setting through my digital persona, I think that it's very, it's different towards, I guess, different people that I'm intimate with. So I guess there's another part of it where you think that whatever you decide to share, even though you choose to share it, once it's out there, it's something that, that it's no longer this private intimacy or just between two people. You know, whoever decides to take a look at your records also gets to witness that intimacy in a way as well, or maybe tries to capitalize off of it or something like that. So we're coming up close to the end of our discussion. So I just wanted to kind of wrap things up about what we've been talking about. I think we've had a really meandering conversation. We've tried to think about these kinds of binaries, and I think we've talked about knowable and the unimaginable, in how we're trying to speculatively look at the future and think about how we're trying to see how we can interact with the world and create different kinds of multiverses in our work. But I think also we kind of looked at structure and agency when we're thinking about how can we make sure that when our audience interacts or experiences our work, that they're able to be properly guided or to be properly cared for in that way. And I think that that final binary of everyday life and unending history is definitely visible in the way that we try to we have our own perspective, and we try to capture a moment either in space or time. And we know that that our works are about habit and repetitive, and I think there's just a lot of stuff that we talked about in this conversation, and I wanted to thank all of you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. And I hope that this has brought out a lot of interesting tethers and connections in your work. So I wanted to thank you, Paula, and definitely check out her mixed reality installations. And she's currently doing a PhD, so I'm sure that there's some awesome stuff in the background that she's working on. And I wanted to thank you, Julia, for coming here and giving your curatorial perspective, and super excited to see what you get up to in the future as well. I'm sure there's loads of things. And thank you, Ibiye. I've really been fascinated by your work and how you look at architectural spaces from different kinds of perspectives, and not particularly, you use technology, but not in the way it's necessarily meant to be used. But I think it's absolutely awesome. So, and I want to thank you everyone watching on the live stream, and for giving us your questions. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And if you haven't checked out all the works on the website, please do. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their Saturday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was such a lovely conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.